Ladies and gentlemen, the final speaker of the day, I'd like to now hand over and introduce you to Tim Farmer, who's going to be talking about vulnerable clients in the care market, and I think he might go off-piste on a couple of areas if we want him to. So, ladies and gentlemen, Tim Farmer.
Thank you, guys. First of all, thanks for coming back after Frank. I was expecting to see a dearth of chairs. What I was going to talk to you guys about today was vulnerability, how to detect vulnerable clients. Although I've had a couple of people come and ask me about mental capacity stuff. So can I just see a show of hands? Who would like me to talk about mental capacity and how we assess mental capacity? And who would like me to talk about vulnerability and how we assess vulnerability? Okay, vulnerability it is. But what I'll do is I'll throw in some mental capacity stuff as well for you. So, that's me, by the way. So my background, I'm a multi-award winning author and expert witness, specialising in the assessment of mental capacity and vulnerability. I work alongside Baroness Finlay and all that sort of stuff. My company, TSF Consultants, is a multi-award winning company. We're the largest provider of capacity and vulnerability assessments to the legal, financial and health sectors. What I want to do today then is I'm going to talk to you about vulnerability. I'm going to talk about how we can detect it, how some of the things you guys do influence a person's vulnerability, how people slide through the different areas of vulnerability, different types of vulnerability. And I'll give you some tips around practical things to do and practical things to think about. So, let's start off by defining what a vulnerable customer is. The FCA define a vulnerable consumer, as somebody who, due to their personal circumstances, is especially susceptible to detriment, particularly when a firm is not acting with appropriate levels of care. So that tells us two things. It tells us that firstly, everyone is potentially susceptible. So everyone you see is potentially vulnerable. The other thing it tells us, it's not just about actions or circumstances, it's not just about the individuals, but it's about the actions of the institutions. It's about how you guys, about how the lending companies, about the banks, about you as individuals, about how you support them and how you present the information you have and you expect them to understand. So in Vulnerability, a Guide for Lending, we identified three main contributing factors to vulnerability. The first one are the individual factors. So this might be somebody who's got a brain injury, as Frank was talking earlier, it's people with mental health problems, a bipolar issue or something like that. Then with a brain injury, it's permanent and it's constantly there. There might be wider environmental factors. For example, somebody might be moving home. I was chatting to someone the other day and they were talking about how it was to do with a loan they'd taken out. And they were saying that they'd moved house and they put all the papers into one box and that box had got lost and it was up in the loft or something. And so they missed certain deadlines. And as such, they hit certain penalties. Then we've got the actions or inactions of lenders and others. And as I said, this might be about the way that you provide information. It might be about how you expect people to engage with you, to interact with you. For instance, if somebody's blind and you're just sending out normal bits of paper, the fact that they then can't read that or access that makes them vulnerable. We also know that vulnerability is fluid in nature. So for example, the first element is temporary. So people can often be okay one day and then something happen which makes them vulnerable, but then when that goes, they come out the other side. I've put up there the example of a UTI or delirium. Do you guys know what a delirium is, by the way? Want to talk about UTI, urinary tract infection? Yeah? For those of you that don't, I'll just give you a little bit about it. So a delirium, by the way, how many of you guys will see people in hospitals or care homes? Yeah? Okay, quite a number. So a delirium is a psychotic state that's caused by an illness. And I remember seeing a lady in a hospital once with a UTI, urinary tract infection, the most common cause. And she believed that all the doctors were actors and that there were zombies in the empty beds next to her. Now a delirium, there are four main indicators for a delirium. And you have to have two of these and you become high risk of contracting a delirium. The four main factors are, you need to be over the age of 65. You need to have an infection, you've broken your hip, or you have a diagnosis of dementia. Now, 2 of those make you high risk for a delirium. Now, if we think about the population in a care home or a hospital, that's 99% of those people. And a delirium manifests itself by a sudden change in presentation, by somebody being suddenly more confused or psychotic, hallucinating. And one of the key things that you guys need to be aware of when you're seeing your clients, the treatment for a delirium is an antibiotic. So you get 7 days worth of antibiotics. But the delirium can last for up to 6 weeks after the treatment is finished. So if you're going to see somebody in hospital or in a care home, first things you need to be asking for is, have they been on antibiotics? Have they got a temperature? Has there been a sudden change in presentation? How long ago did that presentation last happen? And since they've finished the antibiotics, have they gone back to where they were before that happened? If it hasn't, then you're still likely to be seeing somebody in a delirium, in this fluid state. The next guise, if you like, for somebody that's vulnerable, we talk about it being sporadic. And this really links a lot to mental health and bipolar. You know, sometimes people can be stable in their mood, and other times they'll dip, other times they'll go up. And it kind of fluctuates. And so it's not just a one-off instance, it's not there permanently, but it's something that we expect to come and go. The final one is the permanent one. The classic case of this is someone with a brain injury. You know, once you've had that frontal lobe injury or whatever, then it's there and it's permanent. I'll give you a real-life example about how we flow potentially. Actually, next one. So, the FCA labels vulnerability as people that can be potentially vulnerable. So that's everybody in this room. We're all potentially vulnerable. To somebody that is vulnerable, so something's going on, whether it be individual, whether it be environmental, that's affecting their ability to engage or to understand the relevant information. And we've got people that are deemed to be highly vulnerable, and the highly vulnerable are those that are at increased risk. And it's very easy to go through these stages. Let me give you an example. I'll talk about my dad. So my dad is a very clever man. He's got a degree in pure maths from Oxford. But that's about 3 months ago, he went to the doctor. Now, he's one of the old school. Never anything wrong with him. When I was a lad, I remember he fell down a ladder, was hobbling around for about 3 weeks before he went to the doctor. And the doctor said, "Oh, you've broken your kneecaps." So he never complained. So he went to the doctor and he said, "Actually, I've got an issue with my foot. I'm finding it really, really difficult to walk on." Showed the doctor his foot. He had gangrene in 3 toes. Yeah, the doctor sent him straight to hospital. Now, this is a man who'd never been on any sort of medication. Within 2 days, he's on 7 different painkillers. He's on morphine, he's on tramadol, all this sort of stuff. And there was an instant change in his mental state. He went from being able to hold a conversation to not being able to remember what somebody had said to him kind of a week before. An hour or so before. So then he's moved into the vulnerable stage. We then are chatting to the consultants. And the consultant said, "Yeah, well, of course, the reason your foot's gone gangrene is you've got cancer." All of a sudden, not only has he then got that, the impact of the medication, but the whole emotional stuff kicks in on top of that, and he shifts from the vulnerable to the highly vulnerable. And at that time, the consultant was saying, "You know what, probably not going to bother cutting your leg off because you're not going to live more than a couple of weeks." Yeah. 2 days later, we see another consultant. He says, "Oh yeah, we can treat that, not a bother." A week later, he's back home. They've taken him on half his medication, and he's starting to be able to remember things and engage. 3 weeks ago, he came off all his medication. He's absolutely bright as a button, and you wouldn't know there was anything wrong. So within the space of about probably 2 months, he's gone from there to there and back again. And that can be the same with any of your clients, with any of your individuals. So how do we know that? How would you, as an advisor, kind of really be able to pinpoint what's going on? So one of the things, when we think about mental capacity, when we think about how people are making decisions, how they're able to gauge what to do, We talk about how key life moments affect people's decision making. Okay, because we base how we make decisions on what's gone before for us. I'm reading a great book. It's called AI. It's called Algorithms to Live By. It's about how they map human decision making onto AI things. And within there, it talks about how when we make a decision, just by changing one small factor can change the outcome. And I'm going to do something with you guys, see if we can get it to work. So tonight, okay, you can do one of two things. You can meet your favourite celebrity and become lifelong friends. Now, I know you've already met him on stage. That was Frank, and I appreciate that. But let's say you meet your favourite author, your favourite musician, your favourite rock star, whatever, and become lifelong best mates. Okay, that's one option. Or you can have dinner with a family member. That's the other option. Okay, so dinner with a family member. I'm not trying to influence you, but lifelong mates. Okay, so who would like to meet their favourite celebrity, star, rock star, author, and become lifelong mates? I would. I think it's pretty cool, if I'm honest. Yeah, and the rest of you, you're all freaks, but that's fine. You want to, okay, so the rest of you want to meet family members. Let's change it slightly. You're going to die tomorrow. Now, how does that affect your thinking? And what they found was the younger an individual is, when asked that question, they're more likely to want to meet their life, their hero, because their view of what their life is going to be is different to somebody that's 89. And so one of the key things we talk about when we're thinking about vulnerability, when we're thinking about mental capacity, is about understanding the client, about getting to know what those key life stages are, getting to know that, because that then informs what they do next. My best mate Kenny, when he was 19, he was made homeless. And he was homeless for about 9 months. And even now he talks about how when he had 50 pence, he didn't know how long that was going to last him. Now, if you give me $2,000, I'm off snowboarding. No two ways about it. If you give Kenny $2,000, it's in the bank, it's carefully put together, even though he's a really successful businessman now, because of that past kind of life experience. So I can't emphasize enough, when we're thinking about trying to work out vulnerability, it's about knowing your client. It's about looking for those key life moments that will influence what their next decision is going to be. I love this guy. It's Horton. Horton Hears a Who. Any of you guys know Horton Hears a Who? Okay. Let me tell you, he's awesome. But I love him because of this bit here. A person is a person no matter how small. And if I could steal that for our company, I would do, because that, in essence, is what we're talking about keeping the individual at the heart of what we do. So whilst vulnerability isn't the same as mental capacity, there are lots and lots of crossovers. Okay, I always think about mental capacity, mental ill health, and vulnerability. You know the old Venn diagrams from when you were a kid at school and the old maths things? Some of those circles link. They don't always. You don't have to have a mental illness to be vulnerable. You don't have to be, you're not vulnerable because you've got a mental illness or lack of capacity. But some of the key things we look for are, they've got to understand the relevant information. And the key with that is relevant. So when we're thinking about the decisions they make, are we asking them, they're making a will, do they know the name of their cat? Because unless you're Karl Lagerfeld, that's really not that important. But what is important, do they know how much they've got to give away? Do they know how they're going to divide it up? We talk about retention of relevant information. And again, it's that relevant information. Have you guys ever heard of the threshold of understanding? No? So the threshold of understanding is what makes a capacity item specific. It's the thing, the threshold of understanding is what does a person need to understand to make a specific decision. So what you need to understand about whether you invest in a particular good or whether you take out an equity release, it's going to be very, very different to what you need to understand as to whether you get married. And it's that threshold that is key to, again, to whether when we're working out a person's mental capacity. And it's that relevant stuff that that a person needs to understand. Incidentally, do you guys know how we form memories? No, I'm going to take that as a no. So there are lots of different ideas, lots of different schools of thoughts, but the main one is that the brain works in a number of different ways. So it will cluster information together, and then it adds in environmental triggers. So if I was to give you a list of words, say orange, shoe, banana, jumper, and green. There are 3 different groups in there. Can anybody tell me what those 3 different groups were? Fruit, colours, and clothes. Yeah, fruit, colours, and clothes. And then what the brain does on that, it adds in environmental factors. And that's why you'll be driving down the road, songs on the radio, you burst into tears because it reminds you of being heartbroken at the age of 18. And so it's those environmental factors, it's that whole thing that links together that forms our memories. Now, this is really important for you guys, because what research shows us is that it's these combination linked with physical state that improves our memory. So they did some tests in Amsterdam, of all places, where they got people to smoke loads of marijuana, and they gave them a list of names to remember, and they asked them, and what they found was they were more likely to remember that list of names if they smoked marijuana again than if they were sober. Same with alcohol. If you have a pint and you're asked to remember information, you're more likely to remember it after a pint than if you're sober. Clearly, you've had 20, it's gone. But they also know that the environment, so if you were to see one of your clients in this room and give them information in this room, they would be more likely to remember it in this room than if you saw them in the corridor out there. They'd be more likely to remember it if you presented that same information to them in exactly the same way you did the first time. So if you presented it to them written, and then if you then gave it to them orally, they're less likely to remember it. But if you gave it to them again in a written form, they're more likely to remember it. So this is really important about when you're thinking, when you're seeing potentially vulnerable individuals. Where did I last see them? How did I last present that information? Because I have to replicate that to get them at their best, to see if they're able to understand or retain. The other thing we're looking for is a person's ability to be able to weigh up and use information. And when we talk about weighing up and using it, it's about applying it in practice. We often talk about unwise decisions. And one of the things we're trying to work out is somebody making an unwise decision, or are they making an incapacitous one? Do you guys know, can anybody give me a definition of an unwise decision?
Take your clothes off here.
Okay, what now? No, sorry. What? Taking your clothes off, right here and now. Yep. Why would that be unwise?
It's against social customs and acceptance.
It's against social customs, and what was that? Was it a risk?
Might get arrested.
Yeah. You've seen me do it before, haven't you? Okay, so in my book, by the way, I've got a book. It's called Grandpa on a Skateboard. Got to number 1 on Amazon in the UK and US. You can get it on Amazon right now, $9.99. So when we're trying to work out if somebody is making an unwise decision, there are 2 things we look for. So an unwise decision is a decision that somebody else makes that's different to the decision you would make, but it's based on the same body of evidence. There have to be 2 things present. It has to be a logical series of steps that gets you from that body of evidence to the outcome. And there has to be an appreciation of the risk or the consequences of making that decision. And if you're missing one of those 2 things, we say it's an incapacitous one as opposed to an unwise one. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I went to see a guy around equity release. And I was chatting to him and I was saying, why do you want to take out equity release? He said, well, I need to do some work on the downstairs bathroom, and I want to buy a caravan. I was like, okay, so what are you looking to take out? And he's like, what about 120,000? I was like, okay, yeah. So it gets worse. So I then said to him, okay, so tell me, what about the thought processes behind this? He said, well, the thing is, my son has suggested that I need to get this money out. I said, okay. I said, I have just been to your downstairs bathroom, and it really is a bathroom. You've got a shower, you've got a bath, you've got a toilet, all that sort of stuff. What needs doing to that? He said, well, it's a little bit outdated. That needs to be updated a little bit. I said, okay, that's cool. How much do you think that will cost? He's like, well, probably about 20 grand. I was like, okay, that means you've got 100 grand for a caravan? He's like, yeah, well, maybe not. Mate, you see, the thing is, my son also wants me to to put his kids through school. I was like, okay, now we're getting to the nub of the matter, aren't we? I said, okay, so you've got 2 kids. You've got your son and you've got your daughter. Tell me, what does your daughter think about this? He's like, well, I haven't spoken to my daughter about it, but she'll be fine. I was like, okay, if you're giving your son, 120 or whatever, what are you giving your daughter? He's like, well, of course, she'll get the house. I was like, oh, will she? Should we just talk about how equity release works? He said, well, no, I know how it works. He said, I get out a loan, and then, that I pay interest, and then at the end of the time, the house gets sold or whatever, and then whatever's left in the house, the daughter gets. So I was like, okay, that's cool. How much is your house worth now? It's like 500,000. So if you're taking out 120,000, let's say compound interest of whatever, how much do you think is going to be left in about 10 years? He said, well, of course, there'll be 500,000 left. I was like, what? How does that work? He's like, well, because that's what the house is worth. And what he wasn't able to do, even though he could tell me the different bits, he wasn't actually able to weigh it up and work out the consequences of his actions. And actually, by taking that money out, it would reduce the value of the property. I saw another lady. She was 89 years old, had early onset dementia, no driving licence, £400,000 in the bank. She wanted to buy a £350,000 sports car. Now, even though we presume capacity when we go and see someone, that lands on your desk and you think, I know where this is going. That's cool. And I said to her, right, let's think about this. Tell me what's going on. She said, well, I'm 89 years old. I've got cancer. Been told I've got 3 months left to live. I've got a son. Since he was yay high, he's wanted a sports car. That sports car is worth £350,000. So I don't want the sports car for me. I want to buy it for my son. I was like, oh, that's really cool. What if they've got your diagnosis wrong? What if you're not going to live for 3 months? What if you're going to live for 2 years? She goes, well, I said, okay, if they have got it wrong. She said, if I buy this sports car for £350,000, I've got 50 grand left. Now, I own my own home. I don't really have that many bills or outgoings. So actually, I probably don't spend more than 20 grand a year. So if I have got it wrong, if I am alive for another 2 years and I've spent my 25 grand, bearing in mind I'm 89 now, if I'm still alive at 91 and I've spent all my money, the state can look after me. So can you see from those 2 examples, there was one where clearly he wasn't able to weigh up the consequences and the impact of his decision, where on one she could. And so one was what we call an incapacitous one, and one we'd say was a capacitous decision, because she was able to apply it all. The other thing we need to be mindful of is this ability to communicate. And this is often when we're talking about vulnerability, where we find the institutionalized vulnerability comes in. So I'm sure you guys are all very good at sending out information on a regular basis. But actually, how do you know your client's reading it? How do you know they're able to read it? And if you're sending out this information and not able to read it or not able to understand it, then actually that starts to really raise their levels of vulnerability. And it's really important that we, when we think about all these sorts of things, we also don't confuse communication with someone's ability to understand, someone's ability to retain and weigh up information. For example, if I was to put sellotape around your mouth, put a bag on your head, put you in a straitjacket, don't get excited, but then to ask you what your date of birth was, ask you what your name was or where you were born, you wouldn't be able to tell me. Doesn't mean you don't understand it or can't communicate, or can't retain or weigh that. It just means you can't communicate it. So again, when we're trying to work out if somebody's vulnerable, it's about how do we support them to do all this stuff. Now, I wouldn't expect you guys to do that. I wouldn't expect you guys to go into the effort. So when we do our assessments probably take 7 hours from start to finish by the time we've done all the pre-work and the post-work. Now, this isn't something that I'd expect you guys to do. But what I would expect you guys to do is to be able to sit there and go, okay, what are the flag points for me that say there's an issue here? That say, actually, is this person able to understand the information? Are they able to weigh it up? Am I communicating with them in such a way that makes it possible? Because it's about having that niggle, being able to flag up that niggle in your own practice to then say, right, what do I do now? And if you have that niggle that you can't then kind of solve, that's when you give us a call. That's when we come in with our underpants on and our cape flowing, and we kind of sort it all out for you. So look, I've been told we're pretty much at the end of the time. That's flown for me. I don't know about you guys. There's lots more I could kind of talk about and top off, but is there anything in particular you'd like me to cover very quickly before I come to the end of my time? Has anybody got any questions? Over there, yeah.
So what you've suggested is, you can come in and provide some assistance to us.
Yep.
Whether a client is potentially vulnerable.
Yep.
I guess part of the difficulty might be is how do we introduce that to the client when they might not know they're vulnerable?
So it depends what the background is. However you present this is always about saying, look, what we are trying to do here is we're trying to support you to get the right outcome and the thing that works for you. So it might be that you've got a family member in the background who you know if they make this certain investment or they do this certain spending, that person's going to come out of the woodwork and go, right, mum, dad, they didn't have the ability to do that, stop it, blah, blah, blah. So it's about saying, we know that this might happen. So let's get an expert in, let's get Tim in, or one of Tim's colleagues, and he can have a chat with you, and we can firm up and we can evidence that you know what you're doing and you're able to make this decision. So that if it is challenged, bang, we've got the evidence. So it's about kind of couching it in those terms. It's about, we are here to support you and make sure that your wishes are met. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I guess suggesting to a client that doesn't think they're vulnerable that they might be.
Yep. The other way to do it as well, though, is about saying, look, from our point of view, I know, Mrs. Smith, I know you're fine. I don't have a problem with that. But the FCA have said that I've got to do this. So even though it's a pain, this isn't about you, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you, but I have to do this because this is what this is what the FCA tell us to do. So we're going to have to do it for that sort of thing. Oh, and by the way, it does mean if anybody should challenge it later, you know what, we're all covered and it's not an issue. So that's another way to approach it. Would that be more useful?
Yeah, each situation is going to be different.
Yeah.
Probably need more than one way to approach it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So it's the client that normally pays the bill. Yeah. So it would we charge a fixed fee, and we would on it would say assessment for equity release or assessment for investment. And that's how it's not. It doesn't say assessment to see if you're mad as a box of frogs. We tried that and it didn't go down too well. Okay, but if you have a particular concern about what should be on that invoice, about how it should be presented, you let us know, and we will word it however is necessary to make your client feel comfortable.
What would be a typical range of your charges?
So it depends what you want. So right at the bottom end, if it's around, say, lasting powers of attorney, that's around 400. Right up to, if it's for a will, it would be 900, but that's for a full-on 15-page full-on report. If you just needed a file note for a will, it's around 450. Equity release is 450. So it's around that sort of thing. And as I say, they're all plus VAT, but they're all inclusive. So that would include all travel, that would include report, that would include assessment, all that sort of stuff. It would be useful, I can give the guys here a copy of our rate card and I can kind of get it all disseminated out to you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool, we'll do that. Yes?
With regards to incapacity on a lasting power of attorney,
Yep.
if you feel that an unwise decision has been made maybe once or twice,
Yep.
by an individual, how do you prove that? If the client themselves, or the actual person, thinks that an unwise decision hasn't been made.
So first of all, we're allowed to make an unwise decision. Okay, so the unwise decision is about the decision that somebody else makes that's different to you, but is still okay. I wonder if kind of what you're really asking is, you think they've made an incapacitous one, where they haven't really understood it?
Purchase something
Yeah.
which isn't going to be useful for them.
Yeah. So it's about, from your point of view, it's about saying, look, do they have that rationale? Can they demonstrate a logical series of steps that gets you from A to B? And are they appreciating the risk and the consequences? That's the first step. If you're there as an individual going, yeah, actually, I'm happy with that, that's fine. If you're sitting there going, I don't think that either of those two criteria are being met, then that's when you need to kind of say, look, actually, I need to get someone else in to just check on this. Now, we can make as many unwise decisions as we want, because each one is a standalone unwise decision. You know, I go and see Spurs pretty much every weekend. My wife tells me that is an incredibly unwise decision week on week. We're allowed to make unwise decisions, but it's not about how many unwise decisions we make. It's about when we start to fail to understand the consequences of those decisions that the flag starts to get raised. Does that make sense? Yeah.
How many of these questions or statements you've given us are in your book about grandpa on a skateboard?
How many of these
What you've been talking about today?
A lot is in there, but much more is in there. So what I've given you today is a incredibly high level thing. My book, Grandpa on a Skateboard, goes into much more detail. It's written very much in a way, I wrote it several years ago when there was loads of really thick technical tests and texts around how you assess capacity, but no real practical stuff. So you could probably read it in an evening, but it's in there about this is how you kind of do it in practice. And there are some really good tips around stuff. So yeah, I mean, I'd recommend you buy it.
I've got it.
Oh, you've got it?
Well, I know that it's free to people on Amazon if you've got Amazon Gold or whatever it
Yeah.
is. Yeah. That's
Yep.
the whole point.
Yeah, get it.
I do know about it.
Brilliant stuff. Cool. Yes.
Tim,
Yeah.
how do we, as non-specialists in your field, tell if someone is just a vulnerable or whether they haven't got mental capacity? What's the guidelines to distinguish between the two?
So I think the guideline for me is about this ability to make the informed decision. And with mental capacity, we're really looking for, do they not understand the relevant information? Can they not remember it? Can they not weigh it up? Vulnerability is more about people being in a situation that might affect their ability to apply stuff. So from my point of view, I would be starting at the start and saying, do I think there's an issue here? If I think there's an issue, let's rule out whether they can understand, retain, weigh up and communicate. If we can't rule that out, that says to me there is an issue around mental capacity. If we can rule that out and they're still making their behaviour indicates that there's something else going on, I think that's when we shift into vulnerability. I'll give you an example. I saw a guy who was incredibly vulnerable, and it was around the lasting power of attorney. And he was saying to me, I want to make my son, my eldest son, my attorney. I was like, okay, that's really cool. Tell me, your son's just come out of prison, hasn't he? And he was like, yeah. I said, what was he in prison for? Oh, for fraud. Okay, and who did he defraud? Oh, me. Right. Let's think about this. What do you think he's going to do when he gets access to your money? This guy said he's going to take my money. He's absolutely going to take my money. Is that right? Do you think it's wise, then, to give him that power? And his response was, he's my only son. If I don't give him this access, I will never see him again. And for me, the relationship and having contact with my son is more important than the money. I'd rather see my son and have no money than have all the money in the world and not see my son. So to me, that said, okay, you're understanding this, you're retaining it, you're able to demonstrate this unwise decision, but you are incredibly vulnerable because of this emotional attachment. Does that help illustrate what I mean between the two? Yeah, cool. That's right. Any other questions? Any other stuff? Yeah.
Dealing with a couple that are married.
Yep.
One seems totally okay, one you have doubts.
Yeah.
Is that still as bad as one, the fact that one understands it fully? Is that okay?
Okay, so the question was, we're dealing with a married couple where one seems bang on and the other you've got doubts about. So I would be saying that first of all, you need to separate the two, because what we're looking for, certainly when we're talking about capacity, is can an individual do it by themselves, not with somebody else. And while you'll know this, when you see couples, someone always takes the lead. My relationship is my wife, but there's always one of them that kind of says most, that takes the lead in that sort of stuff. And in those instances, it's about separating them out and seeing the one you've got doubts about on their own, to be able to say, right, let's look at you as the whole, let's look at you at the individual. Because in your mind at some point, you've got to be thinking, it's okay while the partner's there, but what happens if they die in a freak yachting accident tomorrow? And this person's by themselves, how are they then? Or when that person goes off to work and this person's by themselves and they haven't got that influence around. So I'd be saying that actually, even though it seems to be quite potentially a healthy relationship, sometimes they're not healthy relationships, it's about still separating the two out. Does that make sense? Yeah? Cool. Yes, mate.
Probably more common. I come across clients where they are of an age where they would be considered vulnerable clients, but they're definitely not.
Yep.
And if I was to speak to, say, a retired pathologist, and he's 78 or something like that, and sort of say, well, we've just got to treat you as a vulnerable client.
Yep.
He'd be so insulted, he'd probably kick me out of the house.
Yeah.
Other than using sort of like an inverse of your questionnaire in the case of, does he understand relevant information?
Yep.
Is there something I could do to expand on that so that when I'm submitting something to our regulators, they say, yeah, he's signed that off, that this guy is clearly.
So if it was me, when it comes to writing up your notes, what I'd be doing is I'd be saying, look, in order to make this decision, these are the key elements they need to understand. So let's take equity release, for example. They need to know that it's a type of a mortgage, that it's a loan against the house, that the compound interest is going to be this, and this, and that's how much they're going to pay back. Actually, it's quite what we call quite a low threshold. So I'd be saying, okay, this is what they need to understand. And actually, I asked him if he knew what a mortgage was, and he told me, yeah, this is what it is. Oh, and we went through, how much you have to pay back. And he said, yeah, I realised that I would only have so much equity left in the house when it went, and that my kids would only have that much. So I'd be going through and saying, so this was the relevant information, and I know he understood it because he told me this, and I know he could remember it because actually, just before, I saw him last week, and we went through it all, and then I saw him again today, and we just recapped it, and before I got him to sign the form, I said, look, Mr. Smith, just quickly tell me what it is you're about to sign. And he was able to say, well, it was around an equity release, and I'm drawing so much down out of my house, and it was this much, and I know it'll affect the kids' inheritance, but that's okay because I've done this for them, or I've spoken to them, and blah, blah, blah. And so you've kind of gathered the evidence, and what you're doing is you're just linking it back to these things and saying, yeah, you know what? And so it's absolutely not about going to your client and going, you know what? You're 79 and you're vulnerable, because they will kick you out the door. But it's about in your head going, what are the flags that I think need to be there? And so when you just write it up, you just reference those, flick them across to give that evidence. I don't suspect it would be a big change in practice, but it might just be a little tweak here or there that you go, okay, yeah, got that. Is that fair? Yep. Cool. Yeah.
Can mental capacity or vulnerability assessment relate onto the type of decision you're making? You might be capable of saying, well, what you want for dinner.
Yep.
You might not be capable of deciding which investments you want.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And is that the case that it can vary according to the job you're asked to make?
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to this threshold of understanding. So capacity is decision specific, because what we need to understand, what we have for breakfast, is different around investment. And it's really important that we narrow that decision down. I went to see a guy down in Exeter. By the way, in terms of time, can I just tell this little tale? I'm being told I've got to get off. But okay, so just to illustrate the importance of the specific decision. So went to see this guy down in Exeter. He had a brain injury, hit on the back of the head, and he was telling me, look, Tim, I've got a 20-minute memory, and I've been asked to assess his capacity to do property and financial affairs. And he said, look, Tim, I tell you, I don't have capacity to manage my property and finance because I forget after 20 minutes stuff. He said, come on in. So he took me in. He opened up his cupboard. He had 5 Xboxes in his cupboard. I said to him, why have you got the 5 Xboxes? Because the thing is, I go to the shops and I think, oh, I need an Xbox. Buy an Xbox, come, I've got 5 bloody Xboxes in my cupboard. So I said to him, well, why don't you take them back? He said, well, because I've forgotten where I've put the receipt. So I said, okay, let's think about this. Is this still happening? And he said, no, because what I've done, well, we spoke about it, and it turned out that what he'd done is he'd given his mum access to his credit cards and all that sort of stuff, so she had control of his money. And so I said to him, have you got an LPA? Has anybody spoken to you about a lasting power of attorney? He's like, don't know, I can't remember. So I sat down with him and I went through an LPA stuff with him. And after 20 minutes, I said, can you just repeat this back to me? And he was able to do it perfectly. He understood and he was able to repeat it back. So I stopped the assessment there and I went back to the solicitor and I said, what's the decision that I'm being asked to make? Because can he manage his property and financial affairs? Because the answer is absolutely no. And we go down the court of protection route. But can he appoint somebody to manage it for him? And the answer is yes. And we go down the LPA route. So you're absolutely right. It can be, the specific decision is absolutely vital. Well, I'm being told I've got to cut my own throat and get off. Has that been useful? Has that been helpful? Yeah? Cool. Thanks for listening.